And how about all the times?
Yes, our viewers are listening in now, Andy. What is it you want to share
I'll
with
save it. I'll save it. Hello, viewers. Thanks for tuning in on Facebook and joining us for Gay USA. This is the 1050th episode. No, I don't quite know what the number is, but it's a lot.
It is a lot. How many years have you been doing it, Andy?
Oh, 38.
38. And we're about to go live and do it again.
Yes, we are.
And we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup, and in honor of Spirit Day tomorrow, as we're taping, and Andy's birthday, I'm wearing purple.
Yes,
royal purple for
Spirit Day, for those of you who don't know, is about ending bullying in the schools, standing up for LGBTQ students, those kinds of things. So people wear purple to signal our support. And yes, I am leaving my swinging 60s and turning 70 on the 19th. No gifts, but if you'd like to support Gay USA, we'd appreciate it.
There's an idea.
Okay, so in the news, President Biden this week addressed the Human Rights Campaign Fund rather passionately.
Yeah, I was delighted to see he showed up, given what else is going on in the world. But we'll get to the details of that and show you a little bit of his speech. And 25 years to the moment, just about, after the murder of Matthew Shepard in Wyoming, anti-LGBTQ violence is up sharply from coast to coast and around the world, according to new reports. We will talk about violence in Spokane, Washington, Albuquerque, and Staten Island.
Mixed results for LGBTQ rights as voters opt for change in Louisiana, Poland, New Zealand, and Ecuador. We'll tell you how those elections went.
And Wisconsin Democratic Governor Evers is telling Republican legislators that he will veto the anti-trans bill that they're advancing.
California got its first gay historic state landmark. What could it be?
And veterans of the Gay Liberation Front put on a great panel discussion at the center here in New York. They were founded in the wake of the Stonewall Rebellion, and they are keeping the spirit of '69 alive, including with a new website.
India's High Court has ruled in the much anticipated marriage equality case.
Mixed results. Rod Stewart is taking a stand against Saudi Arabian persecution of gay people.
A South African hero in the AIDS crisis has died.
And Andy will review Patrick Page's one-man show in New York on Shakespearean villains.
Well, we start with the President of the United States. He gave a speech at HRC, very spirited, introduced by Dr. Jill Biden, his spouse, talked about the many accomplishments of his administration on behalf of LGBTQ people, and then he said this.
But for all the progress we made, we know the barriers, the bias, the bigotry still exist. Perhaps because of the progress we've made, people want to push us back and pull us back. Over 600 hateful laws introduced across the country, more than 70 of them becoming law just this last year, denying the existence of transgender people, silencing teachers, banning books, threatening parents with prison for getting their children health care. Families across the country now face excruciating decisions to move to a different state to protect their child from dangerous anti-LGBTQ laws. I received a letter from one mom who wrote me, and quote, "I despair for families like mine who will already become refugees inside our nation." Refugees inside our nation? That's how she feels, like a refugee inside our nation. This is the United States of America. And the United States Congress, extreme MAGA Republicans trying to undo virtually every bit of progress we've made. They're trying to wipe out federal funding to end the HIV epidemic, strip funding from community centers for seniors, reinstate the ban on transgender troops, ban the Department of Justice from enforcing civil rights laws, ban pride flags from flying on public lands. Who the hell? Oh. Not very presidential. And they threaten the legal recognition of same-sex marriage. And these are just the cruel attacks on the LGBT community. They're attacks on the foundations of our democracy. You know, they take aim at our fundamental values and principles, like the right to free expression, the right to make our own health care decisions, the right to raise our own children. I'm never going to stand by and watch families terrorized, doctors and nurses criminalized, or any child targeted for who they are. It's who they are.
I guess re-electing this guy should be a top priority, given what the Republican Party and Donald Trump and all those are standing for, almost all against all those things.
Well, it was nice to see him and his wife get full minute standing ovation from everyone. It's nice that someone is full-throatedly supporting them. It was an astonishingly forthright and strong speech to be admired. And to show up and do it as he's about to go off to Israel in the middle of a war, as the Republicans are blowing up the Congress, I was impressed.
And we will link to the entire speech in our email. It's about 20 minutes. And you can find all the speeches at the dinner there on YouTube. From President Kelly Robinson of HRC and Matt Bomer and the other honorees at hrc.org.
Lena Waithe and Shonda Rhimes, too.
Yes. And we, as we sit here on Wednesday, we have dodged the bullet of Jim Jordan so far as Speaker of the House. I mean, as incomprehensible as that seems, but today there were 22, I think, Republicans who stood up against him. God knows where they're going to go next. Anybody we get from the Republicans is going to be very conservative, but Jim Jordan is a maniac.
He is. He's consistently rated 0 on the HRC scorecards. He voted against the Equality Act, the Respect for Marriage Act. He's heavily allied with the Family Research Council and the Alliance Defending Freedom, misnomer if ever there was one. He's against trans people serving in the military or participating in school sports. And he's just an overall right-wing bomb thrower. His big push this year has been to indict Biden for some perceived crimes of Hunter Biden. Or impeach Biden. He's a maniac. And to give him power would be crazy.
And one of the 4 former Ohio State wrestlers who testified that Jordan covered up for a sexual predator when he was an assistant coach there spoke last week and said, do you really want a guy in that job who chose not to stand up for the guys, us, while we were suffering there?
And Elise Stefanik got up to nominate him for speaker and said, he's shown leadership in the Congress on the wrestling mat. and all the Democrats went, oh!
Well, where's the outrage from all the far-right zealots who were constantly labeling us as groomers when he was allowing all this to happen? Anyway.
Well, it just reveals their hypocrisy and their trying to profit politically by scapegoating us. There is nothing there in their charges, and I don't know if they know it, but they certainly are not letting the hypocrisy of it stop them.
No.
But my favorite little political moment of the week was when Mike Pence was campaigning in New Hampshire, and someone, we don't know who, it hasn't been identified, someone just spoke directly to him in a crowd and said, when are you going to come out, Mike? When are you going to tell them about our gay relationship? I have the proof right here. But that's as far as we got.
Somebody get that guy on the record. All right, we're up against a sober silver anniversary. It's been 25 years since Matthew Shepard, the Wyoming college student, was murdered for being gay, immortalized in the play and the movie, The Laramie Project. Took Congress until 2009 to pass the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. These days, state legislators are engaging in hate crimes against us. President Biden spoke out on the anniversary of this on October 12th. As vice president, he helped enact the federal hate crimes law. And in his statement, he said, as threats and violence targeting the LGBT community continue to rise, our work is far from finished. And of course, called for passage of the Equality Act, which we're not getting a vote on in the Senate, as Chuck Schumer promised.
Well, the sad and astonishing thing about reports on the Matthew Shepard anniversary is that young people, including in Wyoming, asked about their memories of Matthew Shepard, said they had no idea who he was. They didn't know who they were talking about.
And I was never more dumbfounded than when a friend came home from Cambodia, where they had the killing fields and the genocide of like millions of people, and most young people were not aware of what happened.
It's a terrible thing. The human ability to ignore history and proceed blindly through life is what gets us in all this trouble.
Well, the FBI has released statistics on the trouble we are in. The 2022 crime stats were released and documented a 14% rise in crimes based on sexual orientation and a 33% rise in crimes based on gender identity. Now, that's not news to viewers of this show, but the incidents involving intimidation were the most often reported bias-motivated offenses, followed by simple assault and then vandalism. Race, religion, and sexual orientation were the top three bias categories, primarily anti-Black, anti-Jewish, and anti-gay male.
And they're all up. And I think you can trace it directly to the inflammatory rhetoric we've been listening to nonstop for the last couple of years or the last several years from Republicans. And it has just unleashed the hatred to act. Going back to Charlottesville and that.
Right. I watched that documentary. It was terrific. No Accident on HBO about Robbie Kaplan, the lesbian attorney who brought the suit for conspiracy to the people who went down there and caused all the violence and killed Heather Heyer.
But you see that footage of the neo-Nazis in their white shirts and khakis marching around your old campus. And it's just even more vivid 8 years later.
I don't blame UVA or Charlottesville. These were outside agitators.
Completely.
All right. By the way, if it's okay, since we're talking about Matthew Shepard and Laramie, and if Rich can find this picture, which I had a little later, let's go back to University of Wyoming. We told you about how some sorority sisters at Kappa Gamma at University of Wyoming sued not to have a trans sister, and their case was thrown out of court. We didn't tell you much about Artemis Langford, the 21-year-old trans woman who faced death threats in lurid posts that said she should be put through a wood chipper or hanged, egged on by the fascist media. Caitlyn Jenner called her a perverted, sexually deviant male. Meghan McCain said this is an invasion of women's spaces by biological men. But Artemis had the support of most of her sisters and her sorority sisters and her father. And this was, again, all in Laramie where Matt was killed. The sisters who stood by her were severely harassed as well. So this is her getting the news that the lawsuit was summarily dismissed in federal court. And what she said was, maybe now I can just be me.
That was the lawsuit brought by the hateful sorority sisters against her. This comes up now because there is a really in-depth comprehensive piece in the Washington Post this week or last week that goes through the whole case and all this horrible stuff that happened to her. So you might want to look up the Washington Post piece on Artemis Langford.
I will link to it in our email.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
And we're talking about the trans people we're still losing. In Albuquerque, trans Latina Sherlyn Marjorie, 35 years old, missing since September 16th, was found dead alongside a road.
And her purported killer has been arrested. He said that he was having a sexual relationship with her, but he is married, and he claims that she was threatening to tell his wife, therefore he killed her. She was a drag performer, and she was bound and beaten by him, and vicious murder. Terrible.
And in Milwaukee, Black trans choreographer China Long, 30 years old, was shot to death on October the 8th. Her family organized a vigil on October 12th. She was passionate about dance, born in Milwaukee, but attended the Atlanta International School. This is the 29th trans or gender nonconforming person killed in the United States this year. 24 were of color.
And also in this case, a man has been arrested for her murder. This is all in advance on the cases where the police pay no attention and never get around to finding anyone who is a perpetrator. In Wisconsin, the heavily Republican House in Wisconsin is advancing passed a bill to revoke the licenses of doctors who do trans youth care, and another bill to forbid trans participants in school sports, revoking the licenses of doctors who provide care to youth. That's what they're up to. Now, the governor is threatening to veto these bills, and Tony Evers,
sorry.
And I think he can do that. I think they have a huge majority, but I don't think it's quite enough for them to overcome his veto.
Oh, I hope so. The Republican Assembly Speaker, Robin Voss, compared being transgender to mental illness and gender-affirming care to getting a lobotomy. Now, Republicans there are backing off their peremptory impeaching of the newly elected state high court justice, who was more progressive, who they worry about, Janet, I'm trying to remember, Prostowich, I think. But, so that's a positive sign. We don't know what they're going to do in the future. But I heard a disturbing note in New York. We have a new associate justice of the high court, Caitlin Halligan. She has recused herself from the redistricting case, jeopardizing the new lines that would be more favorable to Democrats. So I'm worried.
Well, and there's no explanation of why she has recused herself. I don't know if you know any more about that.
No.
Okay.
Well, she was Solicitor General. So anyway, all right. In Florida, another loss for Ron DeSantis. Federal Appeals Court refused his request to let his anti-drag law go into effect while the case against it proceeds. Challenge to the law was brought by Hamburger Mary's, a drag-themed restaurant chain. DeSantis's lawyers argued that holding up the law is doing irreparable harm to Florida. The court said the law is likely to be found a serious chill upon protected speech.
Well, I like the fact that these judges are doing good things, but more about judges in international news. All right, where shall we go next? In Kansas City, Missouri, a Costco pharmacist is refusing to sell insulin needles, syringes, when he knows that they're going to be used for testosterone by trans male patients. Now, these are syringes that don't require a prescription. There's nothing to stop people from buying them, except when this pharmacist asserts some religious objection, moral objection.
Well, let's put up a hero of the week who was put through the ringer in Louisiana, Kaylee Timoney, in Walker, Louisiana. The principal of her school went off the deep end when he saw a TikTok video of the student body president there dancing at an off-campus after homecoming party. He chastised her for not living up to God's ideals, stripped her of her presidency, and revoked his endorsement for her scholarship. She started crying uncontrollably. The principal said he worried about her afterlife. This is a public school. He read her Bible verses and sent her home with a religious bracelet. Her mother complained, this is a public school. So dozens of students walked out in protest. Parents posted, "Let her dance" on social media. And under pressure, St. Pierre apologized, reinstated her as president, agreed to endorse her scholarship, but the deadline has passed for the scholarship. So he has agreed to take off the rest of the school year.
I think you ought to pay for her education too.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. I mean, really, a public school.
And staying in Louisiana, they've elected a far-right Republican governor. Jeff Landry, the current attorney general, got more than 50% of the vote in the open primary, so he's the one. He doesn't have to have a runoff. He's going to replace Democrat Governor John Bel Edwards, who held the line for us, who's term limited. He vetoed anti-LGBTQ bills, sometimes overridden. We are without protection in Louisiana now. He said at one point, "If you don't like what I'm doing, leave the state."
I'm trying to understand how it is. I mean, I know Louisiana has become a more conservative state, but electing this guy as governor just is astonishing to me. I can't figure out how that's happening. And who can figure out what's happening on Staten Island in New York? A woman walks into a deli to buy some marijuana for a friend.
Legally.
Legal, yes. And then has a little, is on the phone with a friend asking what exactly she wants, and then trying to discuss it with the guy behind the deli counter. And somehow he gets into his mind that she is trans, which she's not, but she's bisexual. I don't know if that's relevant, but he read her as trans, got furious at her. She wasn't doing anything. And he proceeds to attack her, beat her, and drag her out of the deli by her hair.
And then kicked her in the head.
Yes.
This is back on July 28th. The police have done nothing. So she filed a lawsuit against the deli saying, look, even if I was, this is her quote, even if I was a transvestite, what does that have to do with anything?
Right.
So this is the West Brighton Deli and Grill. She's so, the owners did fire.
She called them when this happened in the middle of the incident. It took them 4 hours to show up.
Well, the owners did fire the worker, but they won't identify him. She was apparently wearing a rainbow wristband. And of course, that's very triggering for a lot of right-wingers these days.
Hey, what about all the Taylor Swift friendship bracelets? Are we going to get in trouble for those? He's on video doing this to her and kicking her in the head. I think they should be able to figure out who he is, even if the elder will not.
In Ham Lake, Minnesota, hundreds of Muslim parents are threatening to pull their kids out of a charter school if the administration doesn't remove LGBTQ children's books from the age-appropriate K-5 anti-bias curriculum. 200 of 1,000 kids were kept home in a 4-day attendance walkout. Now, Minnesota has an opt-out thing. These people could be opting out of some of these lessons, but that's
the school told them that.
They don't want anybody to hear about this.
No, because it is against their religion. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think this is a religious charter school. It's a charter school, but it's not religiously affiliated.
Not a religious school.
Right, but they are asserting their devoted need to not have any of this education in the school.
Well,
Uh, we may have a new hero soon in North Carolina. A 9-year-old trans boy is suing, along with his doctor, his family, and local LGBTQ organizations, for access to gender affirming care, which he is being denied. 9 years old.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
In Spokane, Washington, in the Perry district, there's been an uptick in anti-LGBTQ vandalism, and we have a video report on this.
Good evening. I'm here in the Perry district where several homes and a business were vandalized last night. Now the community says that they're shaken, but it makes their message of love and acceptance all the more important.
This video was taken from the steps of Paul Dillon's home. He says this is the second time this week their pride flag has been stolen. And he says this wasn't the only damage. Dillon's campaign signs were slashed.
It's terrifying. It's a really invasive feeling, and it's really hard to feel like our neighborhood here in Perry is just not under attack right now.
Dillon says he has filed a crime check report, and he believes this attack was targeted.
It's an attempt to scare LGBTQ plus communities. It's trying to intimidate and cause a lot of fear in the Perry district, and we're not going to stand for it.
Dillon's home wasn't the only target last night. His neighbor Owen Williams, who's lived in the neighborhood for over a decade, says his flag wasn't stolen, but the person responsible certainly left a clear message.
Over the course of one night of it being up, somebody ended up going up onto our porch and stabbing it.
Williams says he knew something like this would happen, but his mom convinced him that's all the more reason to put it up.
My mother wanted to kind of paint the picture that, like, hey, there's more of us than there are them, so there's no reason to kind of like fear like we should be able to express ourselves the way we want to.
Around the corner, Wishing Tree Bookstore was left to pick up the pieces of the attack. Torn down flags, smashed pumpkins, and the remnants of egg. Owner Janelle Smith says these fear tactics won't work in the Perry district.
In some communities, maybe it would work and it would scare people and then they would feel alone, but you don't get that here.
Despite last night's incident, Dillon says their neighborhood will continue to support the LGBTQ plus community.
We're going to continue to be loud, continue to stand in solidarity with LGBTQ plus communities. And at the end of the day, love will always win.
In Spokane, Demetra Maragos, Nonstop Local.
There was also an LGBTQ youth center sign that was defaced and a rainbow crosswalk that was damaged. When I first heard about this, I thought, oh, this is, some teenage kids who are just going out to do this and giggling about it. But man, you see that guy with the face mask disguising himself, and he looks full grown and is armed with a knife. It is scary.
And it's good to see people not retreating in the face of this and just hiding their flags. But keep in mind, this symbol is identified by all the right-wing media as something that you need to oppose, and people are taking it upon themselves to commit acts of vandalism.
Yeah.
All right. In Philadelphia, we told you about the murder of gay AIDS and activist and journalist Josh Kruger, 39. The family of the 19-year-old suspect who was at large, Robert Davis there, says that Davis began a relationship with him involving drugs starting when he was 15 and threatened to post, he says that Kruger threatened to post sexually explicit videos of him. Now, this is all alleged by the family. They also said that the alleged perpetrator had mental health issues. And that's the kind of thing that's just all going to have to be sorted out at trial if they ever find him.
Yeah, it immediately called to mind the Ed Buck murders in LA, where he would entice young Black men, mostly with offers of drugs, and then exploit them sexually.
But again, this is it's like we don't know.
We don't know.
The family could be putting this up because it'd be the best defense that, it's sort of a gay panic defense that the kid has. But if he was exploited when he was 15, that's terrible.
Yes, but a lot to sort out and no way for us to know the real details of this.
How about that Governor Newsom? So he vetoed 3 pro-LGBTQ bills, citing ambiguity. They would have done things like required insurance plans purchased by California residents to cover gender-affirming care and abortion, would also prohibit health plans from instituting copays for specific preventive health services. He says he supports the goals, but we could get sued over this, and it might not comply with federal and state law. So it could be worse if we let it go into effect. He also outlawed one outlawing employment discrimination based on family caregiver status, something LGBTQ advocates wanted because many of us have chosen family members that we may not be legally related to. He said it's ambiguous and it burdens small businesses. But he did sign a bill ending school book bans based on racial and LGBTQ content, calling it long overdue, and that takes effect immediately.
And did he have to sign the honoring the Black Cat Bar as a statewide historic landmark?
I don't know, but I was I didn't know about all this history. Black Cat Gay Bar in LA. This is now the first historic landmark that honors LGBTQ history statewide. It was raided by undercover police on New Year's Eve and Day, 1967. The cops trashed the place and arrested 14 at the Silver Lake Bar. 6 were booked for lewd conduct because they were kissing. But here's a picture of the protest that erupted on February 1st. Hundreds of demonstrators outside the Black Cat demanding that the LA police stop attacking and arresting gay people with signs that read, "End illegal entrapment," and "Blue fascism must go." What's old is new. More than 2 years before the Stonewall protest, organizing using phone trees, but neither arrests nor protests were covered in the mainstream press.
And speaking of historic events and people, you attended the panel of the Gay Liberation Front veterans this past weekend in New York.
Yeah, they are our Mount Rushmore. That's Mark Horn, from left to right, Mark Horn, Mark Siegel, Perry Brass, Martha Shelley, Flavia Rondo, and John Knebel. Now, Martha was there talking about, her book. We had her on the show, her memoir. But she was asked on the panel, what made the Gay Liberation Front, founded right during the Stonewall Rebellion, different from the groups that came before? And she said the difference was that we didn't give a rat's ass about being respectable. So it was a militant group. It constantly engaged in protest. It spawned many other LGBT groups. We famously say, oh, it lasted a couple of years and it flamed out. It didn't. People went on to other groups. And they just stopped meeting at GLF. They did all the other things. And all those people are still good activists.
There they are. And someone once told me that the natural lifespan of any volunteer activist group is 3 years, but it does seed the movement. Yeah. And when you put out the image of rebellion and of self-respect and fighting back, that affects a much wider population and has led to the worldwide revolution we have now.
So if you want to learn more about the Gay Liberation Front, they now have a website. It's glf-foundation.org. glf-foundation.org. You can read about all those people and about the history of the group.
Admirable lineup. Really good. And I heard there was a great turnout for it.
Yes, well, the place was packed. I mean, not a huge room, but it was.
Some people care about history.
Full of the best people. Anyway, in Philadelphia has joined cities declaring themselves sanctuaries for gender-affirming care. Mayor Jim Kenney's executive order says the city resources will not be used in investigations that would punish anyone seeking gender-affirming care in the city. It makes the care available in city jails. And if the state or federal government bans gender-affirming care, they're going to look at not enforcing that.
Okay. All right. A couple of other significant people that we lost this week. Rudy Perez, 93 years old, died of complications of asthma. Dancer and choreographer, a revolutionary and iconoclastic postmodern dancer. Refused to define the meaning of his dances. And he did all sorts of stuff. This is a picture from 1968 of his fundamentally important work, Countdown. But he did all sorts of wild stuff. He did stuff with cars in the street. He was all over the place. And when people would ask him, what's this about? What's the meaning of this? He would say, whatever you think.
Born in the Bronx, started out in the Village doing his work, and moved to LA in 1978 and had a long career there. Choreographed more than 100 dances.
Survived by his partner James Kovacs
and Margot Pallavi, a high school phys ed teacher who became a lawyer and tirelessly lobbied the federal government for equal opportunity for women in college sports, fighting with the male-dominated NCAA, and pushed anti-discrimination bills that made no specific reference of school sports, such as Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, but that banned sex discrimination in education programs, which of course includes sports. She was a lawyer for the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women that pushed for implementation of this, athletic scholarships for women, equal funding for women's sports, and prioritized student athletics as a form of physical education, not just like it is for the men with scholarships and all that kind of stuff. So she was another native of the Bronx, taught phys ed at Hunter College High School, worked for feminist leader Bella Abzug in Congress, and a great pioneer.
Really made sure that Title IX was interpreted and put into effect the way it was meant to be, because there was a lot of pressure to make it very narrow. And she fought against that and made sure that it had the effect it needed to have. She and her late partner, Katrina Renouf, had their own law firm, Renouf and Pallavi. Okay.
International news?
Yeah.
Well, the big news is from India with the much anticipated decision on same-sex marriage, and it was a letdown.
Well, some people are interpreting it optimistically. Some are not so much.
They said no. They said that the legislature has to do this. We can't. Then the chief justice.
Before.
Then the chief justice, in a minority opinion, decision, said, well, but you've got to start end discrimination, make the society free of prejudice for LGBTQ people. Well, you had the chance, Judge, and you passed on this. So anyway, they called for a high-powered committee to evaluate laws that discriminate against gay couples and deny.
I think this committee is going to decide on benefits that should be enacted outside of the word marriage, various benefits to same-sex couples. Also, there are 28 states in India, and they are now empowered to legalize same-sex marriage state by state, as we started with in this country, as Mexico is currently doing. That's another way to get it going. But this is what I meant when I made a reference to judges earlier on, because we have relied very heavily on judges in this country to move us forward with a lot of their decisions, although now we look like we're hitting a little brick wall with the Supreme Court. And in India, we got only so far with the judges. The judges decriminalized homosexuality a couple of years ago, but we're not willing yet to take the step on marriage.
And, the government was very much against the Modi government, right wing.
Yes.
Against this, the lawyer for the government called same-sex marriage urban and elitist. But a Pew survey of Indians said 53% believe homosexuality should be accepted. And that's a 38% increase just since 2014.
The plaintiffs, the LGBTQ people bringing the case wanted to assert, as we did in this country, that the Constitution's guarantees of equal protection entitled us to marriage. The court said, no, marriage is not a fundamental right in the Constitution, and therefore we are not going to decide to award it to you. The chief judge's opinion did go on and on and on about the validity of same-sex relationships and the need to end discrimination, blah, blah, blah.
More sentiment than law.
And also said there should be no forced surgery on intersex people, no surgery required for trans people to get documentation, and no police harassment of LGBTQ people.
And our pal, human rights activist Peter Tatchell, was over in Mumbai with Pliny Sukumani there to protest the International Olympic Committee. They're meeting to decide who's going to host the 2036 Olympics. And Peter is very concerned that what they're looking at is reactionary places like China, Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, and Indonesia. So he was over there to protest, and they put him under house arrest in his hotel for more than 24 hours. Wouldn't let him leave. Wouldn't let any food or anything come into the room. It was a little dicey there. You got to get the Foreign Office from Britain to spring him.
The thing about the Olympics these days is no country wants to host them because they're expensive and a lot of trouble. But these fascist countries want to host them because they can get some street cred from hosting an international event. Sports
washing.
Exactly. So, yes, there are bad countries who are the candidates. And this is going to be the 100th anniversary of the Berlin Olympics, the famous Hitler and
Munich.
Yeah.
Right? No, Berlin. Munich was 72.
Yeah.
Okay. The World Bank is working to ensure gay and trans Ugandans are not discriminated against in its programs before resuming new funding, which was halted in August over the new worse Kill the Gays law. Now, they've already got $5.8 billion worth of programming there in Uganda that they're not taking away, but they want to make sure things like their employees are not going to get arrested in Uganda under these laws. Well, of course, nobody should.
Yeah, but they say, at least they're talking and making a little headway with them. In Japan, a court has ruled unconstitutional the requirement of surgery for gender change on documents. So that's a step forward. And in Hong Kong, a court has ruled that same-sex couples married in Canada and the UK have rights to public housing in Hong Kong, which requires some legitimization of your relationship to be entitled to public housing.
And Miss Universe is going to feature 2 trans contestants in November, Miss Portugal, and we already told you about Miss Netherlands, the contest.
All right, Poland.
This is the big story. Well, on top of the India story. Go ahead.
Well, they held a big election for a new government, and much to our amazement, the gay center leftists party looks like it's going to be able to organize the new government because the center left parties won more votes than the current fascist, horrible right-wing government that's been in power for some years now. The right-wing government got the most votes, but only about 36% of the vote. So they're not going to have enough to organize a new government, but a coalition of the more progressive parties is going to be able to organize that. Now, I've noticed in the coverage, and there's been a lot of it, that no one has identified Donald Tusk, the leader who's going to be the new president, probably right there, is gay.
Fantastic.
It's been left out of all the coverage. See, once again, the mainstream media is afraid to say that he's gay.
And he's a former prime minister.
Yes.
But now he's not the president, which is another office. And the right-wing president serves until 2025 and can veto some of the things this government does. And of course, this right-wing government, the Law and Justice Party, whatever the hell it is, they have rigged, things, to really slow down any massive change. But it's still a very encouraging win.
It is. I was amazed that those results were announced and not buried in some way.
And Ecuador, on the other hand, dumped the leftist government and elected center-right Daniel Nabayo, a banana executive. His running mate was very outspoken against LGBTQ rights, but he has to build a coalition government. And New Zealand took a turn to the right in elections, rejecting the Labour government of the former Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Chris Hipkins, who was in office, amidst inflation and other economic concerns. So this National Party led by Christopher Luxon will hurt a lot of people in terms of social programs. They say they're not going to look back and try to do anything about marriage or abortion.
And a little sad news from Nepal, where the lower courts are not honoring a Supreme Court order to recognize same-sex marriages.
Yeah.
I don't know what the lower courts have to do with it, but evidently they are stopping same-sex marriages.
And in Turkey, President Erdogan doubled down on homophobia, the issue that got him reelected, despite the earthquake and his mishandling of it. He said he does not recognize LGBT and announced a crusade against what he calls perverse trends that aim to destroy the institution of the family.
Oh, boy. And in Manila, in the Philippines, a drag performer was arrested for offending religion. Why? Because he dressed as Jesus, dancing to a rock version of the Lord's Prayer.
Well, there's a law there, against offending religion. So
yes,
that's not a thing that we had a picture of him. It's a little out of order, but there it is. Anyway.
Yeah, sorry, I jumped to him.
Rod Stewart turned down a gig in Saudi Arabia over the country's anti-LGBTQ rights abuses. Homosexuality carries the death penalty there. He said, I'd like my choice not to go to shine a light on the injustices there and ignite positive change. The rock icon said, I'm grateful I have a choice whether or not to perform in Saudi Arabia. Some of these citizens there have extremely limited choices, women, the LGBT community, and the press. He turned down Qatar 15 months ago for the same reason, $1 million. Saudi Arabia offered a lot more. But by the way,
because they found they can buy half the golf tours by offering them a lot of money.
Back in 1976, Rod Stewart wrote a single, The Killing of Georgie, Part 1 and 2, inspired by the murder of a gay friend way back when.
Well, thank you, Rod Stewart. Very insightful of you.
Okay.
All right. Shall we move on to HIV and AIDS news?
Yes.
Well, I'm very interested in this new report out of the CDC about the use of PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, taking a pill to prevent acquiring HIV sexually or any other way. So they have put out a report, the CDC, about the usage of PrEP because it's been a very slow uptake. People who don't have HIV don't want to take a pill every day to prevent getting it. So it's been a slow uptake of it.
There is an injection you can take. I think it's every 3 months.
Yeah, well, however you're doing it, it's been slow to catch on. And in fact, in 2019, 23% of those who were considered at highest risk were using PrEP. 3 years later, last year in 2022, that had gone up to 36%, which is a nice jump. But here are the things to look at. First of all, we have three charts. The first chart shows, breaks it down by race on who is using PrEP. And it turns out that 94% of the white people who are considered at risk are using PrEP, whereas the next line down, 24% of Latinx or Latino people are using PrEP, And finally, at the bottom, 13% of Black people are using PrEP. This is a shocking discrepancy.
Yes.
And 40%, next chart, I think. Next chart, 40% of men who are considered most at risk are using PrEP, whereas 15% of women most at risk are using PrEP. New infections are mostly in gay and bisexual men, third chart.
Yeah.
On the left are the, the whole chart is of people, new infections with HIV. And the section on the left is gay and bisexual men. This is 2021. And the next categories are heterosexual women, heterosexual men, and people who inject drugs. So we see by this that it is gay and bisexual men who are most at risk for HIV infection and are getting it most, but white men are the ones taking advantage of PrEP. If you can go back to chart 3, the new infections, it is Black men on the left with the highest number of new infections. And then Latino men are the blue line, the next highest number of new infections. And the third pillar there is white men getting new infections.
And the CDC came out with a draft proposal recommending the antibiotic doxycycline as a morning after pill, like PrEP, after an unprotected sexual encounter to prevent chlamydia, syphilis, and gonorrhea. Some clinics have already started providing it. It's recommended for men who have sex with men and trans women who have had a bacterial STI in the past year or who are otherwise at increased risk. Remember, this doesn't protect you from Mpox and herpes and or HIV for that matter, a lot of other things. But this is now becoming a mainstream thing. Take an antibiotic as a morning after pill if you've had an exposure that might be.
Or use protection in the first place.
Correct. How about those condoms?
How about them? All right. Well, we want to mourn the death of Dr. Jerry Kuvadia. Is that right? Yes, 83 years old. South African. He was a legendary activist on HIV and AIDS issues in South Africa. He bucked the establishment on mother-to-child transmission. He said, all this thing about don't breastfeed because you'll transmit HIV. He said, there's really very little of that. The more important thing is that pregnant and new mothers should be taking drugs like it was AZT for a while to prevent transmission to their newborns. And he succeeded in turning around the common wisdom about how to prevent mother-to-child transmission.
Now, he was famously a big anti-apartheid activist, and of course, very aligned with the ANC. But when Thabo Mbeki came along, he's an HIV denialist. And when South Africa hosted the International AIDS Conference, Mbeki gets up there and is denying HIV as the cause. And then he was running the thing, and he was put under pressure to have the health minister close out the conference, and he said no. He had Nelson Mandela do it, so he certainly paid a price for this, to not have this denialist person. But he did terrific work, and he helped roll out the world's largest HIV treatment program once they got rid of Mbeki. And he, when he due to his activism, he got his house bombed. So this was a very brave guy.
Well, it is the theme that we emphasize week after week on this show, the power of the individuals or small groups grassroots people who stand up and fight back and insist on the truth, and how important every single one of them is, because people in power, establishment people, are less likely to search for the truth and the right way to act. I mean, look what the Republicans are doing in Congress. And look at the India Supreme Court refusing to legalize same-sex marriage. It is the powerful who are less likely to do the right thing.
All right. No, seriously. And folks, I hope that, look, it's something we all have to reflect on. What more can we do? Just what can we do?
And it can just be small acts in daily life. Just speaking up to object when someone says something bigoted or dangerous. Making, that library in Michigan that was shut down because the right wing stood up and wanted to defund it and succeeded in that. Well, now a year and a half later, they've turned it around and the right wing has sort of disappeared and it's all calmed down. And the Patmos, Michigan, the sane people are back in charge. So I've come to think that there are these waves of hysteria that screw things up, but they do pass.
Yes, and in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where they have a right-wing school board, it woke people up, and now people are working on getting better people elected this year.
But we've really got to emphasize the need to turn around the Congress next year, not to mention school boards and local legislatures and everything else. We have a big chance. And with elections coming up in a couple of weeks here, too.
That's a tough country.
All right. End of the lecture. A few more news items.
Yeah.
I saw a documentary that's being released next week, streaming online and on DVD, The Life and Times of Allen Ginsberg. It's actually quite fascinating. It's very personal. There's a lot of him reading some of his work and talking, a lot of people talking about him who are quite fascinating from those times. A lot of old video, young Joan Baez talking about Allen Ginsberg. So keep your eye out for that.
You've seen Patrick Page as Hades in Hadestown, for which he was nominated for the Tony, and Green Goblin and Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. He has a flair for portraying villains. He was also one of the stars of the cross-dressing drama Casa Valentina by Harvey Fierstein on Broadway. But now he's brought his one-man show on how Shakespeare invented the villain. All the Devils Are Here, off Broadway to the DR2 Theater there on East 15th Street. And I just say this is not to be missed. He fills an intimate space. It's not a big theater. With his famously sonorous bass voice, but he gives you keen insights how Shakespeare turned his villains into recognizable human beings. You have to remember these people are actually of our species. And he gives an expert commentary, so he portrays a lot of the villains. He can be chilling, certainly, but also very funny, just as Shakespeare's villains can. So it's a memorable 80 minutes.
We were happy to be at the Tassos Gala last night, and they next week are doing their annual free Halloween short plays evening, which should be a lot of fun. So you might want to try that.
We'll check that out. And Kevin Spacey has a movie coming out, Control. And he spoke at Oxford at a thing against cancel culture. He's totally unrepentant.
Yeah, well, he got a big standing ovation for that, too. But check out Tassos, The Other Side of Silence, and their Halloween shorts. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Okay.